Leadership BISD is just another avenue for us to connect with a community. Whether your role is a business partner, a parent, or just any of the above, sometimes a mixture of several things. We're just glad to have an opportunity to connect with you on several different topics that we feel we help our community have a better understanding of the work we do. I think most of us feel that when we go through school, you have a pretty good sense of what school is about. But it's always from our perspective, and my perspective of school is starting to be a long time ago, back to when my experience was. And things are very different, but the most important thing is the underside of the story, the things that you don't know. Even from a well-informed parent who might have an elementary child, a middle school child, and a high school child, we find many times those parents are well-connected and really have a lot of insight. When you start asking questions about different things, they appear very surprised to learn things. So we just feel it's important for our parents, our community members, our business partners, or whatever your role is in the community, to have a good and certainly better understanding of the complex world we live in. So that's what our time here is about. We're not here for our first session. This is the second session of our 2013 Leadership BISD. So if you were not able to be here last time, would you raise your hand? If you don't mind, we're not going to go around the room for everyone. If you don't mind just telling us who you are and what your connection is here. So if you're a business owner or parent or grandparent or urban graduate, just tell us a little bit about who you are. Then we'll start with you.
I'm Jay Kennedy. My wife Alice will be here in a minute. We're just parents at Northridge.
Okay, great. Thank you for being here. Who else? Yes, ma'am.
My name is Selena Malhez, and I'm TA president for Admin.
Okay, great. Anyone else? First time. Well, great. Yes, ma'am.
Jane Ward, and I've grown up in Berkeley, and I have 5 kids that have all gone to Berkeley schools. I have 2 that are still in Richmond.
Well, great. Jane, welcome. Thank you. And certainly get to know the folks at your table, and each time feel free to move around and get to know others that are here. So I want you to do that as well. Today we're going to talk a little bit more about something you probably don't hear a lot about as far as the school system details in itself. So hopefully we'll be able to dig into that. You have heard a lot about school finance over the last few years because as the state wrestles with the budget, and you've heard budget cuts and things, you probably know that there were extensive cuts to public education in the state of Texas last year, approximately $5.4 billion were cut. So you get to hear a little bit about the specifics of how that impacts Berkeley ISD and the way school funding works and what you learn some things there. And we have always had possible bond referendums in there, and that could be timely because it looks at least very likely the Board of Trustees may be calling a bond election at the February 28th meeting to be possible for May 2013. So, Mr. Seal, our Associate Superintendent for Business and Finance, will be giving us that information. So, Mike,
Good morning. I'm going to present some information to you this morning that I think some of you will find eye-opening and shocking. As a parent in this community, as a teacher in this community, as a business person in this community, will you see how the great disparity between the funds that are made available to Berkeley ISD and funds that are made available to better funded districts in the state. I think you'll be shocked. Every time I look at it, I'm shocked. I went over the figures again the other day with the superintendent. He said this can't be right. And then I talked to a gentleman named Omar Garcia who worked for the TEA for years, who crafted a lot of this funding, and he said, no, your numbers are right on target. I want to say with that we don't spend our days bitter about what we don't have. We spend our days figuring out what we can do the best with what we've got. And we're proud of what we're able to accomplish in this district with the relatively small amount of money that we are given. So I'm not encouraging you to go out of here bitter either. I'm not encouraging you to go out of here and think my kid's not getting a good education in Berkeley because we obviously don't have the money to do that. This has been a frugal district for a number of years. This has been a district that's looked carefully at every dollar they spend, made sure that you were getting a great districts in the state that have much more funding available to them on a per pupil basis than we do, that have finally gotten into a little bit of the mentality that we've been in. Our mentality has always been either or. We can do this or we can do that. We can do anything in this district, but we can't do everything in this district. So we've got to decide what's most important, what will have the greatest impact on student security, student achievement, and community relations or customer service. Other districts hadn't had those tough choices. Their choices were, how many hours a day do we leave the air conditioning on in our indoor tennis courts, things like that. But all districts in the state, when the state cut $5.4 billion out of school district funding, and for a lot of districts that was about 7.5% of their total revenue. When they did that, it meant districts had to say, what can we start doing with that? Now, you can imagine a household in your neighborhood that's surviving on $40,000 a year, and another one on $140,000 a year. The choices for the one at $40,000 a year are a little tougher. It's do I do without shoes? $150,000, $140,000 a year. It's do we cut back on how many times we go out to eat? So we've got different magnitudes of challenge, but we're all challenged. As Dr. Brown mentioned, you should have heard a good bit in recent months about suits that school districts and other organizations have brought against the state of Texas. The claims that were being made by school districts like ours particularly, were saying school district funding is inequitable. Our students should have the same opportunities as a student in Highland Park. There were other districts like Highland Park that said, I don't know that I want to talk too much about equity. I don't want to give up what I've got so they can have more. But it's inadequate. The state is telling us we've got to add all of these course exams. We've got to add summer remediation. If you think about it over the years, when I went to school, I think there was a counselor, but there was a principal, assistant principal, a special education teacher, regular ed teachers, and there was a counselor. That was pretty much it. Now we have to deal with all types of lack crisis. We have to deal with levels of nutritional concern. We have to deal with tons of things that we didn't imagine dealing with then. So the challenges every year get greater and greater. Every year the state says, or the federal government says, we have to do more. We have to take over the role of parent. We have to take over the role of doctor. We have clinics in our schools now. We have to take over the role of social worker. We have some social workers on our staff. I'm not begrudging that we're doing those things, but what's happened is those burdens have added, the funding has not kept up with it. So even a school like Highland Park has said to the state, guys, you keep adding, you keep piling on, and now you take money away from us and ask us to do even more. So one group went in and said, everybody needs more. It's inadequate funding. Another group said, it's an equity issue. If you just give us what they've got, we think we could get by pretty well. There was another group that took both of those and said we're inadequate and we're inequitable. There were some other groups that really didn't have a lot to do with what we're trying to accomplish. One group was an efficiency group. One group had the nerve to say we've got too much money. One group really focused on diverting public education money to charter schools, private schools, and homeschool. And you will see in this legislative session, unfortunately, a lot of our most powerful legislators, Dan Patrick, who's in charge of the Education Committee, first bills that are coming out are talking about how we can open more charter schools and divert more money to that program. But Judge Dietz made a ruling, and the ruling said, first of all, and this was another issue, the way we fund public education is unconstitutional. There's a law, or in our state constitution, it says that the state cannot have a statewide property tax. And the way the state has gotten around that is said our funding will be a blend of local property tax and state sales tax and other revenues that will supplement that. What the judge found, and to do that, they had to give us what's called local discretion, meaning you guys can charge $1 M&O property tax rate, you can charge $1.05. You know, you've got some latitude there. It's up to you. What the judge found is that the demands put on school districts are so great that everybody has to charge $1 for property tax. That makes sense? So it's like saying to people, you got 3 people in their houses on fire and saying, it's up to you whether you use a fire extinguisher or not. Well, the reality is everybody's driven to use that fire extinguisher. So the judge looked at it and said, if not this year, within another couple of years, such a high percentage of the districts around the state are going to be charging the same property tax rate out of necessity, then in effect, this becomes a state property tax. And that's a really big deal to the politicians and to the lawyers. He said that our system is inequitable and inefficient. And we've talked about the inequity. The inefficiency part of it goes to the fact that how they calculate the money we're entitled to really doesn't hit the target. It's inadequate and unsuitable. Inadequate, we've already talked about. There's not enough money to do what we know we need to do, and what the state tells us and feds tell us we have to do. It's unsuitable, it's kind of a different spin on the same term. I think the person who wrote this just like those double phrases, but unsuitable meaning that the way the system works, it just isn't appropriate for fund public education. And then, as I said at the bottom, a de facto property tax, which makes it unconstitutional. That judge will take a couple of months, and he will issue a formal written statement. He's made a lot of comments expressing his feelings. He said this is his ruling, but as most attorneys and judges are, he wants to write a book on it and enlighten us further. So what can our legislature do about this? The legislature has enough extra money right now, money they didn't expect. The sales tax receipts
That's not the fire alarm, so we're okay.
They have enough money. In effect, they did not need to cut school funding this last time, had they known how much extra revenue was going to be coming in. Property taxes had stalled and they're coming back up. Building had stalled and it's coming back up. Sales receipts had slid backwards, they're coming back up. So they have all that money that they took away from us last year. They have that available to give back to us. So what they could do, option A would be provide more funding to public schools and do so in a fashion that reduces the equity gap. So take that money that they took away from us, that they've got sitting in the bank now, and say we're going to give that back. But to the districts that are on the low end of this equity scale, we're going to give them more of it back. And the ones on the top end, we're going to give a little bit less of it back. But everybody would benefit. It would make an enormous difference to this district. That option would again address the problem during the 2013-14 school year, which is the next school year. Would be able to do that to take that money and plan our hiring. Would be able to take that money and plan our teacher salary schedules and so forth. So that's option A. And to a lot of us, that seems like the most obvious option. If you look online, look at the legislative filings, look at the bills that have been filed so far. None of them talk about this. Option B, which is the one the governor favors and the most powerful politicians, is continue to fund public education at the same inadequate level and maintain the current inequity gap until we're forced to do otherwise by the court. Now that's their pitch, and they believe that we should believe that. And gosh, if we jump in and do something now, the court might tell us differently, because this case, Judge Heath's case, is going to be referred to the state Supreme Court. Now I'll tell you, when these cases were filed, the people that were in the know said, we can tell you what the outcome will be. This will be found inadequate, unconstitutional and equitable because it was just so glaringly obvious. This state, by the way, is ranked number 45 in the nation in how we fund education. Number 45 out of 50. Now, that sounds disturbing, but I want you to think about the states that you would probably think are funded more poorly than us. Mississippi, Louisiana. You just go right down the Gulf Coast and you look at states that are really struggling, that don't turn out as many college graduates as we would like, that don't provide the quality of education we would like. So it was obvious what was going to happen. And what happens when the state Supreme Court, this has happened 8 times in the last 30 years or whatever, they always say what Judge Dietz said, which is, I'm telling you it's inadequate, inequitable, unconstitutional. Now you fix it. They don't ever say, here's how you fix it. They don't ever say, here's how much money you've got to put here and here. So it's very disingenuous of the state to say, we're going to wait until the Supreme Court tells us what we have to do, because otherwise we may do the wrong thing. It just doesn't roll out. That option would withhold additional funding and equity relief from public schools until either the 2014-15 school year or possibly even the 15-16 school year. So we would go through 2 more years of struggling to do the things we need to do before the state will say, okay, well, my fear is what the state will do is have that money in the bank that should be earmarked for us in 14-15 and spend it on something else. But one way or another, they'll be sitting on money that they could take care of us with. So how do we compare to our parent county neighbors? And you've got a list there that compares us to all of them. But I want to make some specific comparisons. There's 16 public school districts in Tarrant County. 14 of those receive more than us. The only one receives less than us is Castleberry ISD. I don't know anything about Castleberry. Anybody know Castleberry ISD? That would tell you it's probably not a very large district. It's not a premier district. It's not a destination place. So the only district that receives less than us is Castleberry. We received 22.6% less. It's around that, and I'll do it a little more generously than I should. 25% less, a fourth less money per student than the highest funded district in Tarrant County. That's an enormous disparity. We received 6.2% less per student than the average funding for all 16 of those Tarrant County districts. So what would be the impact on our students if we said, look, let's just set a pattern for equity and let's create equity for us? If we received this funding at the same rate per student, now when I say the same rate per student, I'm talking about the same kind of student. If we have a student that needs special education services, we get a little more money for that student, so does Carol, so does everybody else. If we receive a student that's in our tech ed programs, we get a little more for that student, so does everybody else. Pick your student, whatever type of student that is. You take a student from this district and say, move to Carroll ISD. And they are funded at a higher rate. So if we were funded at the same rate for the same students as Carroll ISD, we would have an additional $31 million a year. Our budget is only about $165 million. So what could we do with that? That would be enough revenue to give every teacher a $12,000 raise and build a new elementary school every single year. That's astounding. We've got schools that were built in 1950. A lot of schools built between 50 and 65. We could start replacing those schools one a year, and we wouldn't have to have bond referendums in the future. How many teachers do we have here? None? Well, there you go. How would you like a $12,000? $12,000 raise. Just because the state did that. Now let's get a little more reasonable. If we were funded at the same rate as HEB, and I don't pick HEB because they're funded at a high rate, but they're the district that I feel we most directly compete with. very similar demographics right next to it. We receive an additional $14,400,000 per year. We can give every teacher a $75 million raise. I know you're disappointed you're not getting your $12,000, but you can struggle down with that additional $7,500. And what if we were just funded at the average rate? We'd receive an additional $88,500,000 per year, and that would be enough additional revenue to give every teacher a $5,500 raise, or hire 7 additional teachers for every elementary campus. So we would be able to hire an additional kindergarten through 6th grade teacher. Pretty amazing stuff. Now the question becomes, don't the wealthy districts send back money to the state? Because I can tell you, if I go and talk to the folks in the grapevine, who I think the second or third highest funded district in our area, they're struggling. They're trying to figure out what they're going to cut. Carroll ISD, their $33 million figure, they went to their voters to ask if they could raise their property tax rate by $1.5 million. It was voted down, but they're making tough decisions. Once you get used to something as a community, I'll give you an example. Spring Break ISD in Houston decided at one time that they were going to build all schools for about 400 students. That was going to be their ideal size. It's a very small school. And they were going to provide door-to-door transportation for every student in the district, even if they lived a block away. Their community got used to that. They planned their schedules around that. They planned their babysitting around that. And when they had to start pulling back from those things, it was a painful process. So we want to make sure if we do get extra money, we don't do things that we won't be able to continue in the future. But let me do a little demonstration to you about how state funding works. Let's say this is a student in Vertical ISD. This represents the funding that we can get for that student. What the state says is you collect what you can with $1 for local property taxes. So we send you a tax bill based on $1 for per $100 of assessed value. And we raise this much money. The state says you're entitled to this much money. So the state says we're going to give you our money until you've got that much money per student. Same dollars. Now, same total dollars. Now, what happens if your local property tax bill goes up? The value, a lot of you this year will see the value of your home go up on your local property tax bills. Well, what happens is we're able to collect more in local property taxes. What the state says, good for us. We're going to take some money back because it's a zero-sum game, okay? You get the same money whether it comes from the state or local. That's what the Robin Hood system does. It's a combination of what you can collect locally with the state predefined property tax rate and what the state adds to make up the difference. Now, here's what happens though. Here's the highest funded district. The state has defined that they're entitled to this much money. We're entitled to this much money. You follow me? Same student, same exact student. And the state didn't really do this intentionally. They signed some legislation. There was a weird thing that happened in time, and they came up with what was called the hold harmless, which says, when we do this new legislation, we're guaranteeing you won't receive any less money than you had before you did this legislation. That was about 6 years ago. And then unplanned, unintended consequences, there's this enormous gap. I'll also take you back to when I went to school. Every school district was on their own. It was almost entirely dependent on local property taxes, except for paying teachers' salaries. You'd send the state a list of the teachers you have and how many years' experience. They'd send you money, and then you made up the rest with local property taxes. So the gap, here the gap is this big. The gap was like this. You had districts that had $1,000 to spend per student. You had districts that had $20,000 to spend per student. So it's gotten better. The state has worked a little bit towards equity. But here we go. We've got these same districts. And you would go through the same formula for them. What the state also says, though, is if you can collect so much in local property taxes that you have more than you need, and the state's not giving you any money, then everything that rolls over, you're going to send back to the state so they can help transfer money to our district. So that's where you'll hear districts like Grapevine ISD will say, gosh, we have to send $13 million of our local money back to the state. That's really tough. That's unfair to us. But they still have this much money, and we still have this much money. So again, they put an economic value on the education of our students. They create a tremendous gap, but they still stay within this definition. Any questions about that? Any questions about just generally what the Robin Hood plan does for us? So the answer is yes, those districts are sending money back. But after they send the money back, they still have $33 million more than we would have if we were educating the same students.
Does that say something about your local elected people and how we develop the neighborhood, develop the community, develop new homes and businesses?
I can tell you that most property wealthy districts, it's a reflection of industry. In Houston, we had Tomball ISD. Texas Instruments was entirely housed in Tomball ISD. The average home price in Tomball ISD was less than a home value in my neighborhood, but we were a property poor district because we were all residential, and they were property wealthy. Ship Channel, used to Ship Channel school districts in Houston that had shell oil refineries and so forth, they were property wealthy. There are things that the state can do, there are things that people locally can do to try to improve the property value per student. But remember, the key for us is, will our values go up right now? Will our values go up? We're locked into a 6-year-old formula that was ill-designed. If we build bigger and nicer houses, if property values go up based on appraisal district, which we have nothing to do with, by the way, if you get mad because your tax bill goes up this next year, we didn't change our rate, and we're not getting that extra money. The state gets that extra money. But right now, again, it's a zero-sum game. We're just...
So we have a limited money period.
That's it. That's
So it's $1,000, let's just say it's $1,000, and if we put in 900, the state gives us 100. If we put in 1,000, the state gives us 0.
That's right. And what's I'm sorry. Let me let you go ahead.
All right. What I was going to say is, so point number one, this group could say when somebody says, well, I don't know, the district's wanting to do a bond or wanting to do a TRE and raise taxes. You know what? My tax bill's going up. I'm paying more in. They've got more money. So I'm going to vote against that. What are you going to say? You're going to say when you gather more money locally, what happens? The state gives you less because we're locked into that 2005 hold harmless level that says this is what you're supposed to get. If you can raise more, if your economy's good or Texas Instruments comes in, good for you. You just saved the state money. You don't get more money. So that would be a flaw that says, wow, you're assuming we got that extra money that you mailed in on your taxes because your property values went up or other things have come in. We're not getting more money. We get the same. It's just a matter of this is probably what it used to look like. The state gave a lot, the district gave this. Well, this is what's happened over the years. Now, locally, we actually get more than the state. So that's one thing you learn in here is that, well, that would be not a good reason to vote against it. There may be other reasons, but that's not one of them. So that's a good point to make.
The only way that we can increase revenue is for more students to come into our district because we're entitled to one more of these for every student that appears. Now, with that student comes the expenses that go with it. That isn't money that we can spend on someone else. This district started open enrollment a number of years ago, and it was because we were so low funded we needed to make some up. So if you have, I'll tell you a situation where one more student is an economic windfall. You have one more second grade student who shows up at Green Valley, and we've got a classroom that has room for that student. So we've got the space, we've got the teacher. Those are your two biggest costs. Then we have marginal additional expense for that student. But if we can get either get the kids to come to school more regularly, less absences, every time a student is absent, we still have to pay his teacher, we still have to pay for the stay, pay for his space. But it costs us about $30 to $35 because that student stayed home. So we either add students or we get attendance up. Other than that, it's absolutely a zero-sum game. Any other questions about it?
The only person that can change that rule is the legislature.
Absolutely.
There's nothing, local school board or local council, nothing to do about it. Don't need to pay it.
We have an option as a local school district to say up to $1.17. We could go to our voters and say, like Caroline's tried to do, say we want you to allow us to raise your tax rate up to 13 cents. That doesn't eliminate the inequity, but it fills some of the gap from the inequity. At a time when you need to sell bonds, which means your taxes are going to go up, you're not going to go to the voters to do that. And we don't feel like that's the right thing for our
That
community.
still doesn't help the situation, does it?
Well, it does, because those 13 cents above, we get to keep those 13 cents.
And the state.
And the state, we keep that money per student, and we get the 13 cents on top of it. And that's significant. Very few districts are going out with that type of, it's called a TRE, a tax rollback election. Very few districts are even trying it, and even less are being successful with it. If I were a voter and I know what I'm knowing, I'd say, do I really want to perpetuate this inequity? Do I want to fill the state's gap, or do I want to work on my local legislators, or maybe hold out until the Supreme Court rules, state Supreme Court, and then have that fixed for our kids? Any other questions about this?
So we took Russell's example, if we're raising 800, the state fills in 200, and we raised taxes, 500 in the state.
That's a completely separate formula. That's what we raise with the $1.04. The state gives us money based on what we can raise with the $1.04 of tax rate. If our tax rate is $1.10, the state turns their head to that. They don't figure that in any way in what they give us.
Would there not be an incentive then to actually lower the rate and let the state make up more of the
No,
difference?
because you're required, the state does that if you will charge $1.04. If you charge $1.03, then the state says, well, obviously you've decided you didn't need as much. So they make the container a little bit smaller. That's why everybody goes to $1.04, because it's called, we used to use the phrase leaving money on the table. If we're charging $1.03, then the state's not giving us all the money they've allocated to us. Because they're saying, if you're not willing to charge that extra penny locally, we're not willing to match it with a representative amount. That was something they figured out in 1995. They took some first passes at this and they ran into exactly that. They also had in it at that time your tax collection rate impacted it. If you don't do a good job of collecting taxes, because we'd have some little school districts out in the country, and then just quietly say to people, yeah, we're going to charge you this much, but you don't really have to pay it, just to get that state money. Any other questions about this? If you want to know what you can do about it, you can talk to your congressman. You can take that one figure, say we are getting funded, we would get $33 million more, 22 or 23% more per student if we had the same money as the highest funded district. Or we will get, whatever it was, $16 million more if we had the same funding as the average. I want them to explain to you why that's right and why they don't want to do something about that. Next, we're going to talk about the bond referendum. We had what we called our 2012 Citizens Bond Committee. This is a 2013 potential bond election, but these folks met in 2012. That was a committee made up of 50 community members, business leaders, and educators, and a lot of city government folks representing every city and feeder pattern. Our feeder patterns are based on high school. You know, all of our elementaries feed up the line to one of the high schools. And every feeder pattern served by BISD, they met for about 4 months. And at the end, they said this is what they believe they did. They developed a proposal that represents a fair and economically responsible plan for significantly improving the educational environment and security of students throughout the district and in each of the 7 cities served by BISD on exercising good stewardship of our taxpayer dollars. Now that is a long run-on sentence. Our community relations department looked at that and wanted to put all kinds of commas and periods, but it gives you the message. Think about the goals of that. We want to significantly improve the educational environment and security of our students. We want to do it for every student throughout the district, and we want to be good stewards while we do it, because the only way we can pay for this is a tax rate increase. The way school district funding works is your tax bill is made up of 2 elements. In this district, we charge $1.04 for maintenance and operations. We don't build buildings with that. We hire teachers, we keep the lights on, we repair buildings, we run buses, we do all of the operational things. The second part is called the debt service part. That's a rate that you can only assess, and it's ours, I think, 39.5 cents. We charge 39.5 cents to do what's just like a home mortgage. When we build a building, we do something like taking out a mortgage. Our version of that is selling a bond. The difference between the mortgage and the bond is on a mortgage, the lender has a direct collateral interest in your home. If you don't make the payments, they can take it away. A bond doesn't work quite that way. But it's the same thing. We borrow money, we pay it back over 30 years to build these new schools. So 2 different tax rates. You don't care. You see your tax bill and you see $1.45 or whatever the figure is. And that's per $100 of assessed value. But when we get that money in, we can only use the debt money. We can't use it to pay teacher salaries. We can't use it to keep the lights on. All we can do is charge enough of a debt service rate to pay off our bonds. The committee made a proposal to the board. The board has met a number of times to specifically discuss the proposals that come from the committee, and here it is in a nutshell. Science labs. The state has changed. Have any of you heard the term 4x4 requirements? 4x4 requirements means, for this particular one, we have to, each student who's going to graduate has to have 4 science courses during their career. Science is unique among all our courses in that we can't have a science course taught in this classroom. We have to have labs, we have to have sinks, we have to have safety devices. We have to have water, we have to have gas. So a science lab is very expensive. A normal classroom you can build for about $200,000. A science lab is going to be one area of, say, $400,000. So the state's requirements have changed. The state has said to us, you have to offer all these science courses. We have campuses where we cannot rotate. We don't have enough labs to rotate the kids through. We have elementary campuses that have no science lab. They take a regular classroom and they wheel a cart in it that has a Bunsen burner. They have a few chemicals. They try to hold the science lab, kind of like you holding one in your den. I guess I would compare it to you. So we looked at the needs to meet the state requirements for science labs. Now the state won't shut us down if we don't meet the requirements. Our kids just won't get the education they need so that they are prepared when they get to college to compete with kids who have had the education they need. Ticket for that is about $15.5 million we need to spend to add science labs and upgrade science labs at our campuses. This is not close to extravagant. This is not the minimum. I don't know on the car scale where I'd put it. It's certainly not a BMW. It's certainly not a Cadillac. It may be a Chevrolet. It's a good functional science lab for our kids. Technology. You all know how rapidly technology is changing. We have 13 campuses that were built prior to 1965. I used to live in a house, an old house. One of the first things I noticed when I bought that house was there were no outlets outside. You know, everybody now is using electric weed whackers and things like that. There were no outlets outside. The electrical capacity of the house was way under what you would need for a house. Well, multiply that 10 times for a campus that was built in the 50s and 60s. So one of the problems, about $6 million of this is just to bring electrical up to code, up to current building standards so we can run our devices. Everything, not everything, but most everything now is going wireless. The days of dragging cables through the ceilings, some of you have been on some of our oldest elementary campuses. You've got extension cords running across the ceilings. You've got computer cables dropping down from the ceilings to our computers. So everything is moving towards wireless. The good thing about that is it's also moving towards tablets. These desktop computers and even laptops are going to be a thing of the past because the tablets are getting so much more powerful and they're so much more economic and they use so much less electricity, and we can hook them up to wireless so that the student doesn't have to be in this place to access a computer. They can go anywhere they want to. So a lot of this is going to wiring those campuses for wireless capabilities. These dollars for technology. That is not only to add new technology, but it's to take our computers that are already 5 and 6 years old and over the next few years start phasing them out. So about $29.5 million for that. Security, $2.82 million. Let me give you a little vision of what we're talking about doing with security and why. We cannot, and our police officers may disagree with me, but we cannot put enough security on a campus so that we can prevent what happened in Connecticut. We can put security on campus so that it makes that less likely. But let's say we put bulletproof glass all the way across the front of the building. Why wouldn't that person wait in their car until the kids go out to recess and just spray the playground? For us, we need to focus on the security that takes care of the more likely events. That is a non-custodial parent who comes to snatch their child, or just someone from the community decides they're going to snatch the child. An individual who is in a divorce, is divorcing a teacher and is mad and decides they're going to go in and shoot him. An angry parent who's going to go in, or an angry parent who's going to go in and beat up a teacher. A high school situation where a boyfriend is mad at somebody who's been messing with their girlfriend and is going to go take care of it. For those things, we need to focus on a couple of things. One is fencing around the properties. We have some communities that are just adamant they don't want fencing on the property. And yet what that means is if you don't have it and the kids are out at recess, anybody can walk across that or drive across that property and mow kids down. Front door security. We want to make sure that on all of our elementary campuses, that after the start of the school day, that you have to be buzzed onto that campus. You go to the front door, you punch a button, you say, I'm Miss Jones, I'm here to see whoever, I'm here to pick up my student. They can see you on a camera. They buzz access to the building so a person knows you're coming in, and they are funneled through the front office. They can't turn. My wife works at Spicer Elementary School. You walk in the door, the office is down there. You can turn right down this hallway and be anywhere in the building you want, and no one knows that you've walked onto that campus. So it is entry controlled. We want to put buzzers on all of the supplementary doors so that if a teacher takes their kids out to recess, they don't have to leave that door propped open or unlocked. They have a card reader that gives them access to that. Again, we want to spend our money on the things that are almost guaranteed to have impact. I will just tell you, if you don't have a non-custodial parent causing a problem sometime in the next couple of years, it will be amazing. We'll be the only district that does it. If we don't have somebody who comes in to beat up a student or beat up a teacher, we'll be the only district that does it. So take care of those things first before we attempt to build a glass dome over the school. So that's where our $2.82 million is going to. We're also looking at the possibility of upgrading the number of licensed police officers we have on our campuses in future years. Our police departments will tell us if we call them today and say, I want you to start having a full-time police officer at Northridge Middle School, North Richland Middle School. They are going to say, we don't have them sitting on the shelf waiting to do something. You know, this isn't a commodity we shop for. We've got to train them and get them ready for future years. So we're looking at hard at how to do that as quickly as we can. Consolidations. We're looking at taking 4 elementary schools and consolidating them down to 2. Yes, ma'am.
I have a question on security. What about the SRO programs at the campuses?
And that's exactly what I'm talking
Are
about.
they still in effect?
We have
Because I was
SRO.
told that some campuses don't have them anymore.
I'll give you a brief explanation of that. We have SROs at every high school. We don't have security officers or police officers at elementary campuses.
But you do have them at high schools. You've got security by the district and you've got SROs.
No, at high schools, all we have is SROs.
There's a security guy that drives around to high school in his golf cart.
He's a parking lot attendant, yeah. You can call him security, he's a parking lot attendant.
He gets on to everybody who parks, yeah, he's wearing everywhere. He locks those gates, he does not let the kids out, I mean.
We advertise
We've
the
had
position,
issues
we call it.
with him saying, like, you know, your children can't leave, and I'm like, I'm going, no, they have a doctor's appointment, they have to take car out. To me, that's security, he is securing the property so that my children cannot come and go.
No doubt, when we advertise positions, we advertise it as part of the
Okay.
business. But the
They can
principals
learn, but-
work with them to do that. Where we gone with that, the situation was we were hit and miss with SROs. We did not have full-time SROs at our 7 schools. We had, of course, we did the luxury of working with several different cities, and over time they have partnered with cities, and we had a program where one middle school might have partnered with Watauga, for example, to have a full-time SRO. Another one might have had half-time. 3 of our North Richland Hills schools had equivalent of about a third, so we had some coverage. Our principals felt it would be better to have full-time coverage. That it's more of a deterrent, it's more of what you described. It's our employee. He can be wherever the hot spots are for drop-off or pick-up in these hallways, and it's more of a deterrent in middle school, but not harm. Ideally, you go to the harm, but as officers will tell you, that's going to be certainly an added expense. You're going to put 7 full-time trained school resource officers at each middle school, that's a significant budgeted item. So what we're doing right now is piloting the SRO full-time coverage, their drop-off all through the day, at the end of the day, full coverage security officer to report back to our board how our principals feel about that, and then do you want to upgrade to a full-time school resource officer, which again is going to be significantly more expensive. So that's where we are on that.
So again, elementaries, we do not have a full-time police officer. If you have an event, then someone is going to come from one of the other campuses, or the, you know, our cities told us when we started talking about doing the security guards, guys, we're not going to just say, well, you got yourself ready to figure yourself out. They're going to respond as best they can. Full-time SROs at high schools, along with parking lot security. Middle schools, full-time security officers that we pay a company to provide to us. At this time, we're not offering different thoughts about that. I don't like the idea of anybody on campus that isn't a licensed police officer on it. But we may go that way, or we may go back to full-time SROs at middle schools. Our concern was if you're a campus and you have a full-time police officer or a real-life police officer 1/3 of the day, then you got to hope that if something bad happens, it happens in that 1/3 of the day. And isn't it better to have someone who's there to escort students, to block doors, and do things like that? So that's where we are, and that will only get, that certainly we will not lessen that. We're looking at how we will increase security in that way in the future. Other questions about security? Consolidations. We have 4 elementary schools in this district that were built prior to, I think all of them are prior to 1955, with very low enrollment. There's a lot of research out that talks about how much better small schools are than large schools. And there's some great things about small depending on how you define it. There's that personal connection, more people know your student. There are some very bad things about small schools. The ability of the teachers to collaborate, the ability if the child is having a problem, to shift them to another teacher and do everything. We believe the ideal size school is about 600 to 800 students. When you get much over 900 students, we believe that's a problem. Well, I worked in a district with an exemplary campus that had 1,200 students on it. What we know is that we cannot afford to have district-wide a bunch of schools that are under 400 students. The cost per student goes up enormously. I will tell you that, so what we're talking about doing is taking schools we need to rebuild and saying we can't rebuild 4 small schools. What we're going to do is rebuild 2 average-sized schools. We're talking about a consolidation of Birdville Elementary School and Richland Elementary School, and W.T. Francisco Elementary School and David E. Smith Elementary School, to build one state-of-the-art for each of those building for each of those consolidations. That will save us in operating costs. And I want you to hear me say clearly about this. This is a plus. This is not the reason we're doing this. The children at Birdville and Richland will get a better education by going into a consolidation. It will be, they will have more of what they need in terms of facilities and so forth. They'll have more of what they need in quality instruction. But the bonus to it is you save $750,000 per year per consolidation. We look at that as a 10-year figure. Over the next 10 years, by merging W.T. Francisco and David E. Smith, we'll get a brand new school, and we will save $7.5 million over 10 years. Over the life of the bond, in effect, we would be able to, we would save the same amount of money that you're spending on those schools. You will save it in operating expenditures because you only have one principal, you only have one assistant principal, one counselor, one librarian, one nurse. You save tremendously on operating costs and other things that you're doing. And trust me, it's between $750,000 and $800,000 a year that you'll save every year by doing those consolidations. We're going to rebuild North Richland Middle School. We had 4 middle schools we could look at. 3 primarily that were all built prior to 1965. We could only afford in this bond to rebuild one of them. The campus that we believe was the most challenged was North Richland Middle, and the reason is because they had half again as many portable buildings as any of the other middle schools. When you think of kids in portable classrooms, I believe they had 18 portable classrooms. There are 2 classrooms in the building, so that translates to 9 portable buildings. If you go out and look behind Richland, North Richland Middle, you'll see 3 rows of those portables. Now that's challenging enough, having those kids outside the building, but that means that library was built for, if we were talking about 18 portable classrooms and 30 kids, that library was built for 500 less students than they had. So was the cafeteria. So everything is challenged throughout the school by having those kids in portables. Committee did a lot of work in looking at Halton Middle School, at Richland Middle School. They just felt like this is the place they needed to land because, again, this is where you were going to benefit the most kids the most. Rebuild Smithfield Elementary School. Smithfield Elementary School was not even built by this district. There used to be a Smithfield ISD. They closed their doors and gave us the school. And so it's not built in the same structural patterns and so forth. It's our most expensive elementary school to maintain like that.
On that Smithfield Elementary, that, I don't know how many kids are there, I don't mean Green Valley, but it was not like most things we combine it with Green Valley, they're less than Model 4.
The numbers.
The reason that you wouldn't do that is the size of the schools. If you,
That's why I don't know how many kids are in the schools.
I'm sorry?
I don't know how many kids are in the schools, but I'm just saying they're less than Model 4.
We would end up having a
1,100.
900,000 student school, and because Green Valley, the other thing you will see is in the areas where we're talking about consolidating, those campuses are shrinking in enrollment. They're gonna have less there in 2015 than they do now. Green Valley is clearly an area that's gonna continue to grow. But we did offer our committee an opportunity to look at half a dozen consolidations and decide the ones that made the clearest sense to them. Rebuild Academy at West Birdville, one of our oldest campuses, and it's a very large campus.
650.
650 students, so not a candidate to merge. Add an agri-science labs and classrooms at Bechtel. We had our agri-science, which is horticulture, is all the other things that go with that. They used to be housed at Richland High School. It was in a building that needed to be condemned. The windows wouldn't hold out the wind and the rain, the roof wouldn't, didn't have proper electrical. They were holding a lot of their classes on a nice day. They would go outside and hold classes under the trees. The other problem with having it at Richland High School was kids from Birdville didn't necessarily want to go there. Halton didn't necessarily want to go there. Where our Bechtel, our technology center, is an independent place. Kids come from all over the district there. Category A repairs and renovations, $34.5 million. These are the kind of things that stack up because you're getting $15 million a year less than you should. We're having to replace lighting in almost every campus because you will no longer be able to buy the T8s or something like that. Now you have to do T1s, the little skinny bulbs. They're much more efficient. Most districts have been replacing those over the years and don't face this challenge because we were so strapped budgetarily, we had to push it off to a bond referendum. Good thing about replacing the lighting, and that's several $1 million of this $34 million, is the energy savings we will get from that. They say that in 3 years, you'll pay back the cost of doing that. Roof repairs, replacing flooring, replacing plumbing. We've got some elementary schools with 600 kids that have one boys' restroom and one girls' restroom. You don't build them that way anymore. So it's fixing some of that, replacing old fixtures and so forth. But a lot of what you would clearly see is general repairs of significant magnitude that you would include in that line. In category B, repairs and renovations, they said you've got $6.95 million to do that. We had a lot of different things there, but we had $14 million of what we call category B items that we wanted to look at. The committee said to the board, you decide, we can only afford to spend $7 million on those items. You decide what you're going to do. And we believe that the board is going to go with replacing the portable buildings and upgrading the core space at Carrie F. Thomas. That's our elementary school that I believe has more portables than anyone else. Same thing possibly at Spicer and the same thing at Watauga Elementary Schools. So what they've focused on is we want to get rid of portables first. There are other things we could do. We could replace another roof over here. We could replace the flooring over here. But we want to focus on getting rid of portables as much as possible. Portables are not only an inconvenience, they are a security risk. I'll go back again. My wife teaches at Spicer. We've got portables that back up to a street that right now don't have a fence around. So much less secure than internal space.
So that 6.9 is not delegated anywhere specific in that bond package. It is just very vaguely, do what you want with it.
It is, but the board is going to designate it specifically, I believe.
They have to say that the board has that option. I mean,
Yes.
we can't go to people and say, the board is going to fix your school and the board's going to do it.
You will be able to once they call the bond election.
Yeah.
The board is going to call the bond, if they call a bond election, they will call it on the 28th of this month. And we will have a defined list that we will send to every campus that says, here's exactly what we are doing on your campus.
And there's always been a pattern of a bond oversight committee that then watches to follow to see what is done and does it match what the bond said it was going to do.
Okay, again, this is just going back to the two mergers, Birdville, Richland. W.T. Green, Cisco, David Smith, and that they will, each one of those mergers, each one of those consolidations will save about $7.5 million in operating expenditures that could be put into future salaries or additional staff, whatever we need, or frankly into doing the type of repairs that have been kicked down the road to this bond referendum. That totals $183 million roughly. That would, to fund that, we would have a tax rate increase of 6.13 cents. Debt service tax rate increase for a $100,000 home, the monthly tax bill would increase by $4.35. And you can't exactly multiply because there's a fixed amount of homestead exemption that you receive. I think it's $15,000. So you add another $100,000 to that, it might go up a little higher than $8.70 because you're now getting taxed on all of the dollars, not all the dollars plus 15,000. This bond package would retire 56 portable classrooms, and that's 40% of all the existing portables in the district. That focuses primarily on elementary campuses. The bond committee, again, was in an either-or look at the bond. They could not do everything. We believe that the challenges that a middle school faces when they have portable classrooms, that those middle school students and that middle school staff is more capable of dealing with that disruption, dealing with that inconvenience than elementary school. One of the reasons is, and remember when we're replacing portables, we're also enlarging the core space to match it. Elementary schools, you have very few optional spaces. So if you need to gather the kids in one big area in elementary school, maybe you can get them in the library, you can probably get them in the cafeteria, maybe you can get them in the gym type space. Middle schools, you've got a lot more room to manipulate, you've got wider hallways. So for whatever reason, the bond committee decided we would focus on elementary schools. So I believe all but 18 of those portable classrooms are going to be removed from elementary schools. Yes, ma'am.
So where, are they gonna be replaced with new portables? Where are the students gonna go that are in the portables right now?
Oh, we're gonna build permanent structured classrooms.
So will they be attached to the existing structures?
It will depend on where they are. I apologize for going back to Spicer. It's the one I spend the most campus at. I had to do the 5th grade Valentine's dance the other day. Spicer has 2 portables that are true portables. They have 2 detached permanent classrooms with a breezeway that takes them into the building. We can tell you when we build new schools how we're going to plan for that. We're going to plan when we build new schools. If we have to add classrooms later, here's where they're going to go so they will be attached to the building. They didn't think that way in 1955.
So it'll be kind of like an exterior kindergarten suite. Like that's what we have in Smith. Our kindergarten's all outside. It's attached to the main building. You can't get into the kindergarten from the main building, but it is attached by a brick wall from the exterior.
It'll be the most, we will get it as attached as we can because we know that's the best. But there are some cases, Holiday Heights, I think they've got classrooms sitting out here with the breezeway, and then we'll put fencing around so people can't just wander between the buildings. 98% of the proceeds of this is committed directly to campus construction. We've got to replace some air conditioning in a couple of, maybe it's in the warehouse, maybe it's in the admin building. We've got to replace the lighting in the admin building. So there is some money that's going to other than campuses, but that's a very impressive feature. I've done a lot of bond referendums. Dr. Brown's done a lot of bond referendums, and I can tell you, you get up over about 90% going on to campuses, and it increases your chance of improvement. That's what I've got on that topic. Any questions or comments on that? Yes, sir.
You were making a comment about the size of the schools in the south, basically, the ones we're talking about consolidation.
Yes, sir.
Overall, you think the size shrinking and the north side growing. And the school, entire school district, you see the student size population growing or overall?
District-wide, when the economy is good, enrollment growth. And I can't, you would think it would just be the same. I don't understand. I guess people have more things. I don't know. But as the economy has picked up, our enrollment has picked back up. But we're growing by about 2% a year. So we're growing by 250 to 400 students every
As
year
a school district.
as a school district. Yes, sir.
And my one was on not consolidations, which I have $2 that are cheap teaching, not in vertical, but teaching. So I always get the question about this is, are you planning on losing any of these educators in the middle of these mergers?
And you have to think about, you've got 400 kids here, 400 kids here, you still got 800 students. So 95% of your needs are still there. A teacher's gonna still have 20, 25 or whatever number of kids in the classroom, instead of in the classroom in a spot. What you'll be able to plan for some things would be, yes, you're gonna need 19 principals up in 21 at some point. But again, you plan for that. You don't just abruptly stop one day. Could it be that you have a person one too many of a counselor or a librarian for a year? Yeah, it could be. But there are a lot of options you have. You're gonna have a large elementary that says, well, we've always wanted that second counselor. Could I please have her for a year? Or she works half-time at a large campus and the other half-time at a large campus during a transition year. That's certainly possible. But nobody loses
I just want to make
their
sure
BISD
in the
job.
consolidation, the classes don't become enormous.
No,
Don't
that
those
was,
figure in for like retirements and stuff that are pending?
There's an average, on an average year, we have attrition. Teacher retirements, teacher moving to other districts of about 10%. And you may pick up a couple of teachers when you do a merger because you may have been forced to have over here 3 classrooms, second grade classrooms, 18 students in each. And over here, 3 classrooms to meet that 22-to-1 overall requirement, 18 each, 17 each, and when you put them together, you say, well, we've got one less teacher.
because that's part of the inefficiency of small. We had pre-K, for example, in this elementary, we had 14 in the morning, 14 in the afternoon, and that's all we could get. So you have to put a teacher there for 28 kids versus right in another school next door, they might have had 22. So they're serving 44 students per teacher versus 28. So again, there's some efficiency there, that's an inefficiency you deal with. And if you multiply that multiple times, because that's the neighborhood school concept that many of us really like. But the problem is, as you see where we are on the scale, and you see what our limited capacity is, you've got to ask yourself, you know, if we start going through the scale real quickly, what you see is, devise a plan over 15 to 20 years, we can't rebuild all the schools that are going to need to be rebuilt. We just can't do it. So you start replacing the schools exactly where they are. If you draw a line, and there's just this group of schools that just absolutely over the next 15 to 20 years are just left out. So it's just not possible to do that because we have a limited capacity. Now, they may raise some limit at some point, but again, just because you can, it's like saying, oh, well, let's put 40 kids in the class. We really need to or want to. Oh, just so we can raise the tax rate. It's not a cap at 50, let's go to 75. Who wants to pay more money when we have other options? So that's where we're forced to look at economies of scale for efficiency. Well, I tell you about collaboration of people working together. As we try to get our kids ready for STAR and accountability and all the things that are in place, we don't need people working in isolation. We don't need a group of 3 teachers where one of them is brand new to teaching, one of them is brand new to second grade, and the third one's been teaching 2 years. They're having rich discussions. They're not real rich. So if you have a group of 6 there, you're more likely to have some experience, been through this before. I'm going to help Daryl, first-year teacher, because when my baby's in that brand new teacher's classroom, I feel better knowing that she's partnered with Ms. Johnson, who's been doing it for 18 years, and they're playing together and they're sharing experiences. So that's a challenge when you talk about a professional learning community, because you don't get second chances for those kids as they go through. That's why you may hear some of our teachers are a little stressed and it's difficult. You know, the state put us in this position, and we have kids coming to us now. We don't get 3 years to get ready for that second grade year. It's happening as we speak. So we're trying to do as much as we can in a reasonable manner to get ready. The state, they're real good about mandates, and you've got to have 40% lab instruction, and they just come up with that, and 4 years of math and science, assuming you have a classroom, assuming you have the capacity to hire teachers, assuming you have the lab space, and reasonable materials to put in the lab. It's like we bought a house, but there's nobody to furnish it. So those are the realities that we have to deal with. So for this referendum, the committee got to hear all that, and they saw quickly, because David E. Smith, as you know, is still living. He'd love this school to be right back where it is. But he was one of the first ones that said, Dr. Brown, we can't do what we really like to do, can we? Because we can't. We can pick and choose and decide who gets left out, who gets to live along for 20 years. But I sat down with him, we went through it, and he was one of the first ones that said, yeah, absolutely. And to take something away is always a challenge. Folks, as I told him, and he agreed, I said, if they had put a school right there where David E. Smith is, and it would be built for 800 kids, and all along that's a neighborhood school that'd be tickled to death that we're building a brand new school. But now Francisco's got to deal with the fact that we can no longer walk across the street. It's going to be, about a mile away. That's the difficult part. We understand that. But it's just help me with a solution. A better solution, because at some point you're going to have to deal with those schools that are built in 1950, 1952, because that infrastructure is there. Concrete, plumbing, wiring, the efficiencies. And for any school we leave right now, a lot of these renovations that Mr. Summerall can tell you about with technology, we just wouldn't do to a 1950 school. Why would you? It's like saying, okay, we're probably going to build a house sometime soon, let's hold off. How much are you going to put in it? Are you going to spend 50% of the value of the house for another 5 years? You probably wouldn't. You'd hold off on major things. Because to renovate the old school for technology is significant. Cinder block walls, the challenges we have, would be very, very costly. And then you come back and go, okay, you spent $4.5 million to renovate the school and tear it down 5 years later. Why would you do that? So those are other conversations the committee had about how much renovation would you be willing to do. But you still have to remember you got a generation of kids going through there if you don't rebuild the school. So it's a tough question.
Mark, when will, after the board meeting on Thursday night, what will we have on the website?
Well, we're working on that right now, so we hope to launch probably Friday, March the 1st, the website with more details about the bond and what the board has approved to put in that. Again, the board's not done that yet, so it would be premature to say, here's exactly what the board's approved, and the board hasn't done that yet. But we're doing some back-end leg work in anticipation of what that's going to be, and if it changes, it's easy to change a little bit than try to redesign a big piece in such a short time.
But March the 1st, you'll be able to go and look at any individual campus and see, here are the things that are being planned for that campus. Yes, ma'am.
What is the timeline from there? So bond election is approved by your board, they decide all the details of it. When do you vote on that? What do you do in the meantime as a district yourselves in getting that word out? What is your timeline in preparing the community for this vote?
May 2013, there's times now we can only have elections during those regular elections,
Right.
The second week of May or second week of November. So they would likely call for May 2013. So we'd have a little over 2 months just to get out information. So we'll have a concerted effort through Mr. Thomas's office with other folks, just going around the community, sharing what the package is, what's in it, and what we get, what the cost is, and answer any questions that they have.
We believe we'll have between 60 and 90 large and small community meetings in that time. And I encourage you, if you have an organization, a group of people, and you think, I'd like these people to hear about that, then you'll call Mark. You'll see if we can work it on our calendar. Wherever two or more gather together, we're going to try to spread the word.
The answer, just real quick before you ask your question, the answer on the election date, the mandated date in May is May the 11th. So early voting would begin, I've got to call it my computer, but it would be the last week of April and first week of May, and then the election day, the actual election day would be May the 11th.
We believe that this is a very compelling bond package. Between us, we've done bond packages in the past. I was in a district that was building one of the schools a year. Brown was in one that was building more than that. Constant bond packages every 3 weeks. This is one of the most compelling bond, or the most compelling by far that I've ever seen. Because because there isn't anything about it that you can look at and say, that's extravagant. Now, you can say, I'm sorry, kids should go to a school building